Hello and welcome to the Stop Talking Shit podcast. I'm your host, Mariam.
I'm your host, Iman.
And today, who do we have today, Iman?
Today we are joined by a very special human being, a long-time friend of mine now, through the gram. Alhamdulillah, we're really grateful for that little connection there. We have Mariam, also known as Tayyib Nutrition. So Mariam Matwali, she is a registered dietitian, and maybe over to you, Mariam, to give us a little bit of background about yourself. And a little bit
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me, Iman and Mariam. I'm Mariam. I'm a fertility dietitian and nutritionist based in Sydney, Australia, and I work online. So I consult clients, Australia-wide and worldwide as well. And yeah, so my area of practice is very much women's health and fertility across the board. So think your PCOS, your endo, your, preconception health in general, and then more the pointy end of fertility. So whether that's going through IVF, ICSI, etc. So that is basically me in a nutshell. And yeah, I'm good friends with Iman, and I also drink far too much coffee. So yes, that's usually what you'll, see me doing outside of my consults.
Yeah, that's usually
is that why you're talking so fast?
I was just gonna say, and that's why I speak far too fast. So I'm gonna try to pace myself today.
How long have you been practicing, Mariam?
Oh my God, like time goes so fast. So I started out in 2020. So yeah, coming on to my 5th year, which is a bit crazy.
Wow, subhanallah, time goes really quick.
It does.
We actually bonded over coffee, did we not, in Sydney?
Yes, in Sydney, correct. And you were very impressed with the Melbourne standard coffee.
I actually was. Yeah,
I gotta say, cafes in Sydney. No.
Well, that's why you've got to have friends that know where the good coffee's at.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah. Otherwise, your coffee and your cafe is not as good as Melbourne. I gotta say, sorry.
Sorry to any listeners from Sydney.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna say probably you're correct, but you definitely you've just got to know where to go. There's some gems.
Yeah. and the people make up for it. I think so. So today we're chatting essentially all things women's health with Mariam and myths that exist within that space. So Mariam's got a lot of experience, of course, as she mentioned, working in the women's health space with a range of different conditions, things like PCOS, endometriosis, fertility, for both men's fertility and women's fertility. So perhaps we'll start with something that I've been getting asked about a lot lately, Mariam, which I know that we've discussed a little bit in the past, is about the carnivore diet for conditions like PCOS, so PCOS. I'm finding that it's trending on TikTok, and that's why people are asking about it. So I'm curious to know whether this is something that you've come across in your clinic and what your thoughts are.
Sure. Well, that's a really juicy one, isn't it? You're just getting stuck straight into it, aren't you? You know what? Interestingly enough, it actually hasn't come up for me in practice, surprisingly. A lot of different diets come through my door when it comes to PCOS. So I think the most common one I hear is like gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free for PCOS, super common. Potentially, maybe like paleo was a bit of maybe the older trend. But yeah, carnivore. So I think okay, let's kind of break it down. Firstly, is a carnivore diet the most health supporting diet? Probably not. It's in terms of thinking about the profile of like fatty acids that we have in the diet, the fiber, the micronutrients, and also like polyphenols. We just don't get that from a predominantly meat diet. So if we're looking at it to PCOS, let's kind of look at the pros and cons and why people might consider using something like the carnivore diet. Firstly, we know that in about 70 to 90% of women with PCOS, there is some level of insulin resistance. So it does make sense to me that again, the research also supports this, that potentially more low to moderate carbohydrate diet, a more low GI carbohydrate diet can actually see a really favorable outcome in terms of that hormone imbalance with PCOS, because it does have an influence on that insulin resistance, which will then have a flow-on effect to the rest of our reproductive hormones, and which causes a bit of havoc in PCOS. So things like the high male hormones or the androgens, etc. So looking at the carnivore diet, so okay, that's potentially why people might say, yeah, look, I feel really good on it and I'm seeing a benefit. Okay, just completely objectively, maybe it's naturally going to be quite low carbohydrate, and they potentially are going to be losing weight as well. We do know that, in terms of cardiometabolic health, that 5 to 10% weight loss can actually have an impact on hormones. So from an objective sense, yeah, I can see that it may have some benefits in the short term. However, in the long run, I don't think it's the most favorable approach, because again, let's take another step back, right? Or peel it back further. So yes, you might have that short-term weight loss, you might have that reduction in insulin circulating, but in the long run, we're having a really high intake of saturated fats, which we know actually increases inflammation, which is not favorable for PCOS. In PCOS in particular, we want to be going for your more unsaturated anti-inflammatory fats. So think your olive oils, your avocado, your fish, etc. So that's not ideal. And the second thing is we do know that women with PCOS also have an increased risk of, things like high cholesterol and other cardiovascular health risks. So that fat profile in the long run is not very much favorable to support their cardiovascular health, right? Other factors as well. So again, in terms of the risk of diabetes, I think by doing that really strict, or that really I guess that approach, which is quite extreme, I'd say, like, yes, in the short term people might apply it, but in the long term, what impact is that going to have on your health? So yes, by going very low carb and high fat, for example, in the short term it might improve insulin resistance, but once we start to reintroduce carbohydrates, which, like, let's just be honest, it will happen because no one can sustain that diet in the long run. It's not going to help your body's ability to, favorably respond to carbohydrates and improve the natural insulin sensitizing effects, because saturated fats unfortunately have a negative impact on our insulin sensitivity. So I think in the long term, it doesn't check out for me. There is some research that's been conducted in terms of what we call a Mediterranean style keto diet in PCOS. Now, this is a lot more favorable for PCOS. So again, I'm not saying you need to do keto or low carb entirely for PCOS, but with these diets the research has been conducted, they've actually used the nutrients that are beneficial for PCOS. So they've gone for the plant-based and and fish-based fats. So again, favorable for that cardiometabolic health. They've got plenty of those plant foods or plant antioxidants and nutrients, so things like plenty of fruits and vegetables, etc., to again help to lower that inflammation, which will be favorable for PCOS in the long run. And it's a lot higher in fiber as well, which we also know is really beneficial for things like the gut health, which actually is really important for PCOS, because some research has shown that there is an issue in terms of like the gut bacteria or gut flora in women with PCOS. And the more unfavorable bacteria species is actually correlated with the symptoms of high androgens. So things like the chin hair, the acne, the facial hair. So in a nutshell, I don't like the idea of the carnivore diet for PCOS. I'd much rather, something like a low to moderate carbohydrate diet that's again going to be having more of those plant-focused foods, which is actually a lot more beneficial for PCOS in the long run. And the more favorable.
Sorry,
that's okay.
Who might not know what PCOS is, can you just give a quick breakdown of what
of course is? Sure.
The updated criteria.
So PCOS is I guess it's a reproductive condition. It's actually more like an endocrine condition that occurs in women, and it's basically, according to the Rotterdam criteria, you need to meet 2 out of 3 of the diagnostic criteria. So basically, one of them is going to be irregular ovulation or irregular menstrual cycle. So that's either you're getting a period, with long periods apart, or you're getting them too frequently. The second is cysts on the ovaries found by an ultrasound. And the third one is signs of high androgens or male hormones. So this could either be through a blood test, or it could be through those clinical symptoms such as, like we mentioned, the acne, facial hair, bulging on the scalp, etc.
Perfect. Thank you.
Love your brain, Mariam, number 1. Number 2, I'm really glad that you touched on the gut microbiome aspect, because I feel like gut health is always such a buzz. Doesn't matter like what generation it is, or what kind of season of the month or flavor of the month. I feel like everyone's really interested in how everything affects the gut.
Absolutely.
And so especially for women, especially when in our practice we're working a lot with women, I'd say a big portion of these women are experiencing some level of gut issues. So, I love that you touched on the importance of the microbiome in women's health, because I think people really separate the two, as opposed to understanding how it all sort of works together. And even from an Islamic perspective, we've got that a lot of illnesses can start from the gut as well.
That's right.
Just a great reflection there. Do you have anything would you like to add to that, Mariam?
I just wanted to clarify in terms of the criteria, the Rotterdam criteria that you mentioned.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned insulin resistance. Does one have to have insulin resistance to have PCOS?
You know what? I'm so glad you touched on that point because I was going to elaborate on it, but I thought I'd keep the response a bit shorter. So actually, according to the diagnostic criteria, no, insulin resistance is not a criteria or a feature that you're required to have to meet the criteria. However, we know that anytime you think of PCOS, you think insulin resistance just goes hand in hand, but in like not again most of the time, not in all cases. So usually when I have anyone that comes through to see me that has PCOS, I will always screen for insulin resistance with some specific testing, and usually that does dictate, I guess, my treatment plan or protocol with them, because generally speaking, if you get on top of the insulin resistance, you can cover so much ground in terms of symptom management.
Yeah. So I guess to sum it up, a carnivore diet, lacking fiber, high in saturated fats, in a very inflammatory condition.
That's right.
Not going to be highly productive, a bit counterintuitive. Short term, maybe a bit of weight loss that might help with insulin resistance. Long term, not so good.
Yeah. For anyone that's looking for any further breakdown of the carnivore diet or ancestral style dieting, please refer to our previous episode on the SCS podcast. So thank you so much for that, Mariam. I think especially given how common and prevalent PCOS is, it was really important to sort of address that. The other things that I'm finding really common, especially in the online space, is, things like gluten and dairy. So a lot of people are concerned in general about gluten and dairy for their health. We've got people cutting out gluten and dairy for absolutely no reason at all, other than the fact that they've read a post somewhere that says gluten or dairy is inflammatory, or this is going to cause X, Y, Z. And so I think we know for a long time there's been a demonization of a lot of different food groups, and there's a lot of fear, I find, even in the general population that are quite healthy around certain food groups and what kind of health benefits or health negatives they might infer. So as it relates to women's health, what are your thoughts on things like gluten and dairy in the context of women's health, but specifically conditions maybe like endo, I know, and PCOS as well? What sort of reflections would you have in that area?
Sure. Love the question. So yes, again, like I said, one of the most common restriction I see with my clients is, again, cutting out gluten and dairy, just really based on Instagram, TikTok, etc., or what my auntie kind of has mentioned. So, okay, in a nutshell, there's for the most part, again, in a general health context or a women's health context, there's no reason to be cutting out gluten and dairy unless you have any specific allergy or intolerance. For the most part, maybe there are kind of subtle, details where it might be beneficial, but let's kind of break it down. So let's start with PCOS, because we started there with the carnivore diet. I think with PCOS, it's one of the most common diets that comes up, especially on social media, that recommends going gluten-free, dairy-free for PCOS. And I've spoken to women that say, oh, look, I've done it, but it's really hard to implement. So they might do it for a month and then drop off the wagon and maybe just, completely derail any progress and then try again. So I think sustainability is really quite challenging. But in terms of, again, is the evidence there to support it for PCOS? Absolutely not. So if we're looking at, again, the PCOS, we know gluten-containing grains can actually be quite beneficial as part of that Mediterranean style diet, but it's all about going for the more low GI, unrefined carbohydrates in the right portion that's relevant for women. So sometimes I think women, again, similar to the carnivore diet, they say, look, I feel really good. That's because they've cut back on carbohydrates drastically by going gluten-free. So they're going to have a bit more energy, or they're going to feel a bit better because the insulin resistance is not quite as, fled, or by having the high spikes in their blood glucose levels across the day. Now, when it comes to dairy, again, no evidence that it's harmful for PCOS. And in fact, the strongest literature available shows that dairy has a net positive, anti-inflammatory or neutral effect in the body for inflammation. So if we're thinking about dairy, it can provide so many nutrients which can actually be quite beneficial for things like PCOS, such as the calcium for bone health, which we know can be an issue in terms of irregular ovulation. It can also, the protein, which can help with, again, satiety and, again, balancing those blood sugar levels in certain meals. And yeah, so
probiotics, good bacteria.
Probiotics, yeah, for sure. I was going to say yogurt, and it's also it's a really convenient, nutritious snack, right? So one of the most common snacks that I might recommend for someone with PCOS in the afternoon to give them a bit of protein to keep them going is maybe some Greek yogurt with maybe a bit of fruit, for example. Very healthy snack, and can be part of a healthy meal. So so I'd say gluten and dairy, for PCOS is I don't rate. Now, endo might be a little bit more complex or maybe has some more nuance to it. So again, there isn't strong evidence that we should be avoiding gluten or dairy for endo at all. But let's break it down further. So women with endometriosis, we know about 50% of women with endo will have IBS occurring together, or potentially a misdiagnosis, right?
Yeah.
So this is another chat altogether. Maybe if they're having quite bad, IBS symptoms such as, diarrhea, gas, bloating, or constipation, maybe there are certain components in these food groups which actually can trigger those gut symptoms. So potentially, if they have an intolerance to, the FODMAP, so fructans found in wheat products or, other gluten-containing grains, that can actually potentially trigger some gut symptoms, and it's quite a common intolerance. So that can definitely play a role. And then when it comes to dairy, lactose is probably one of the most common, the elements found in dairy, which might be, again, something that can cause some symptoms. If anyone is lactose intolerant, again, very common intolerance as well. So off the bat, it doesn't mean that again, there's ways around it. And I think it requires a bit more personalization before you blanket say, just get rid of gluten and dairy for endo. I don't think that's the case at all. But for some people, it might be beneficial just to help manage some of their symptom profile. Another thing, with, I guess, endo and, gluten and dairy, I guess, again, a lot of it is there is some individualization. So in terms of, I think endometriosis is an inflammatory condition. So again, the anti-inflammatory diet is super important here. And again, gluten-containing grains can actually be really helpful here, because if we think about the Mediterranean style diet, which is very anti-inflammatory, one of the main features in that diet is, your whole grains. So I'd say another thing which potentially might be playing a role, which is kind of taking us to fertility territory, is co-occurring conditions, right? So things like celiac disease, which potentially that can definitely contribute to things like infertility and early pregnancy loss. So again, if we're having those gut symptoms, and even if you're not having gut symptoms, but you do experience, things like I guess, unexplained infertility or, recurrent pregnancy loss, it may be worth assessing a risk of celiac disease. And again, I know me and Iman have spoken about this before at length when we've kind of run, sessions on fertility. The issue with cutting out gluten without having done the appropriate testing is actually, it means that the testing that you do is not going to be reliable or valid. So if we cut out gluten and then go to your doctor and say, hey, I think I might have celiac, let's get this checked out, the results of that testing, the celiac serology, is actually not going to be as reliable. So there's a bit to it. I definitely recommend some personalization based on optimal symptom profile. But it's definitely worth noting that there can be harms associated with just cutting out these foods without getting that professional advice, which can definitely impact long-term health, but also things like fertility.
I think there is one concern when it comes to, I guess, a word floating around on the internet now, for a while now, is endocrine disruptors. So I think one of the other reasons why people or why it's suggested to cut out wheat is because of the pesticide component, which can be an endocrine disruptor. And I think that's one of the concerns around endometriosis. I think Ileana agrees with me. Is there any evidence to suggest the role of endocrine disruptors or the role of pesticides as an endocrine disruptor in endometriosis?
Yeah, fantastic question. So in endometriosis, there is research about high exposure to pesticides and worsening symptoms. So you're absolutely correct there. And look, I think, this brings us to another controversial topic, which is organics. But I don't always recommend organics as the first port of call for my clients, but in one condition where there might be a basis for trying to have preference for organic produce, if it's something that's within your budget and you're able to access it, is endo, because we know that basically high exposure to those pesticides can worsen symptoms in endometriosis. So yeah, really, really great question. I think you're quite right that wheat containing products, and they might have high exposure to that pesticides. Yeah. So again, can be a bit of a controversial topic for sure, but I'd say, if you can with
approach,
it can. So
just one.
That's right. But if you can reach for organics with endometriosis, that definitely is a good strategy. And if you can't, I tell my clients, look, if you can't afford doing organic and it means you're going to eat significantly less fruits and vegetables, then it's not a good approach for you, because we know that the fruits and veggies and those kind of whole food components are so essential. But what we can do is use little hacks to reduce your exposure to those pesticides. So You can soak your fruits and veggies in bicarb soda, significantly reduces the amount of pesticides, so up to 80%. So that's a pretty big change, or a big, you know, really tangible difference without having to.
80% because it just cut
80%. Yeah, 80%.
Okay.
So yeah, that's like one of the strategies. So, you know, maybe you can't do organic 100% of the time, but so that we're making sure that we're having plenty of fruits and veggies in the diet, which is helpful for the endo. We do those things to help reduce the pesticides.
Thanks for that. Appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, and I love the focus on the importance of individualization, because everyone is so different, and two people with PCOS or endo might present totally differently, have different socioeconomic background, different access.
Yeah.
And so, you know, taking into account that whole financial and socioeconomic aspect is so important, because there is no benefit in saying to someone, hey, eat this particular way, or like you said, go organic if they can't afford it, or if it's not something that is actually going to be beneficial to their overall health, or they're not meeting the standard intake for vegetables.
Absolutely.
Well, I have actually a reflection on that, because in my younger 20s, I went through this sort of crunchy mum phase, and I was restricting myself because I couldn't get organic fruit and vegetables. I was not eating fruits for 2 years, and that obviously caused some issues for me. So because of the whole label of the dirty dozen, I was like, oh, it's dirty, I can't put that. So I actually restricted myself from fruits and vegetables because I can get access to organics. And that's what you're saying, is we want to avoid that, because in the long
absolutely
that is going to be counterproductive. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
endo, we need anti-inflammatory diet. Fruits and veggies, the most anti-inflammatory. So in a nutshell.
Yeah, counterintuitive to do something like that.
Yeah. Such great reflections there. And I think while we're chatting about diet, I would love to talk about soy. I feel like soy is just like that girl from high school that used to bully everyone and had a bad reputation, and, you know, reformed in their adult life, but people never looked at her the same. I feel like that's soy, because soy has a negative reputation everywhere you look. People are so critical of soy. Even my child is critical of soy. And so, you know, I've always been a soy lover. I know Mariam doesn't mind a bit of fermented.
You don't like it. Do the taste. I like the taste.
Did you ever have like fermented soy though with your stepmom, like her cuisine?
Yes.
Stuff like that?
Yeah. So tofu, it's
tempeh.
Base in a lot of Asian traditions. So we have it with our stir-fry noodles all the time.
And obviously, you know, from a cultural perspective, soy is consumed a lot more in some parts of the world than others. You know, our Middle Eastern background, soy is not a huge part of our diet. But what is the missing? What are the misconceptions around soy? Why do you think they exist?
Yep. So I think the biggest thing that you've kind of alluded to is the, I guess the phytoestrogens that are contained in soy products. So that just creates in people's mind this whole, you know, misnomer that, okay, that means it must have a really negative impact on hormones because it acts similar to estrogen. In terms of, like, in reality, what the research shows is that actually for like the majority of people, the phytoestrogens actually are weakly bound in our body. So it doesn't have the same impact as estrogen in the body. It's not going to be the exact same impact. So people think, yeah, it means it's going to mean, you know, it's going to induce issues with excess estrogen. It's going to make kids go through, you know, puberty early. It's going to give man boobs. So all of these misconceptions, right?
Answers.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So the literature for soy is actually very positive for the most part, because it has these really like helpful plant compounds. So things like, you know, different compounds like this genistein. There's different compounds that have been studied in literature, which have been shown to be really beneficial for, you know, so many aspects of health. So for the most part, like plant protein and women's health can actually be super positive. So in particular to fertility, for example, we know that replacing just 20 grams of animal protein with a plant protein per day can actually improve ovulatory fertility by 50%. Really huge change. So if you don't mind a bit of soy, and maybe you change it up and maybe you do a tofu-based stir fry once a week, or you add it in conjunction to another animal-based protein, can actually be quite a helpful way to get that plant protein. But in terms of, again, subtle differences or nuances, I think the one condition that comes to mind of where I am cautious of excess soy and a potential negative outcome or impact is endometriosis. And that's because we know that, again, it's based on that aspect of endometriosis is a estrogen-linked condition, and even though, like I mentioned, generally speaking, the soy it doesn't have the same impact on the body. We think just from the research that excess amounts of soy in the diet. So we're speaking we're not speaking about, you know, a soy latte, you know, per day, or maybe a soy tofu, or sorry, a soy or tofu based stir fry once a week. We're not speaking about moderate levels. We're speaking like if your whole diet has, you know, it's all soy. So we're speaking like roughly 4 serves per day onwards, which is quite excessive. Most people are not going to do that. So my take for endo is just stick to maximum 1 serve per day, whether it's like a tofu or a tempeh based serve, or something like a soy milk. Oh, hello.
Our friend has just joined us in the episode. I love that you spoke about soy in its relationship to endometriosis, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are on soy with things like menopause.
Oh, love it, because that you took the word out of my, you know, that was my next add-on, really. So yeah, with menopause or perimenopause, I actually really like the inclusion of soy. And again, it comes back to the phytoestrogen. So in menopause, obviously your menstrual cycle is stopping, so your body is not producing estrogen. And we think that by including some of these, you know, soy products, it can actually be quite beneficial to help manage some of those, you know, symptoms of menopause. Sorry, it's so hard to keep a straight face with a smiling baby. I tried my best. So the other thing with menopause, I guess as well, is generally speaking, what are some of the risk factors in menopause for women? You know, we tend to have an increased risk of heart conditions, you know, increase in body weight, a whole host of kind of conditions like bone health is decreased as well. So soy products can actually be quite beneficial to help, you know, offset a lot of these, I guess, risk factors with menopause and perimenopause. So things like your soy products, but also things like flax seeds, which do contain the naturally containing phytoestrogens. And again, very different in the sense of someone who still has a menstrual cycle and you're producing estrogen naturally, whereas in a woman who's experiencing menopause, there's no production of you know, estrogen in the body.
Yeah. So in things like estrogen-driven cancers, like breast cancer, you're saying also that should be a factor that we should take into consideration because of the phytoestrogen. So we should look at reducing soy if we have a high intake of soy.
That's a very great question. I am going to have to hold the thought on that one, because I think I just need to have a deeper look at the evidence base, because I just don't want to say something that is not 100% substantiated with the evidence in this sense.
Yeah, no worries, man.
Respect health professionals that also say, I can't answer that question.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, because I think we live in a society where it's very much, I know the answer to everything.
Like, I definitely have the gist, but I'm like, I'm not going to say it just in case. I'll triple check the evidence. Yeah.
I know there's some conflicting data out there with regards to different types of breast cancer.
That's right.
Either it's hormone dependent, and just for our listeners, just to make sure that they fully understand what a phytoestrogen is, would you be able to clarify?
Yeah. So basically, they have an impact in the body where they, again, in terms of the receptors our body has to naturally produce estrogen or estrogen in women, they basically have what we call a weak affinity or weak binding. So they do bind somewhat to those receptors, but in a much lower level than our naturally produced estrogen. So that's where I think a lot of the confusion comes in of, okay, is it like estrogen? And we know that it's not the same. It's not, the impact on the body is not the same as our, you know, endogenously, or our, you know, the estrogen produced by our bodies.
Got it.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much for clarifying that.
Shall we move on to, no, we want to talk about thyroid now, don't we?
Oh, good one.
Yeah.
So the impacts on the thyroid conditions, Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, thyroid health, on fertility, how that impacts if you have a thyroid issue.
Absolutely. So this is probably one of the biggest things I see in my practice. I mentioned the PCOS being really common. Thyroid conditions are probably, like, if not the most common, the second most common concern that, again, of my clients when it comes to especially things like preconception, trying to conceive, and also, unfortunately, recurrent pregnancy loss. So yeah, this is one of those areas where, like, again, there's so much that unfortunately is missed, or there's so much, there's a huge lack of awareness, right? So broadly speaking, the thyroid is like a master controller of our reproductive system. So it controls, you know, our metabolic rate, a lot of our hormones, including our reproductive hormones as well. So it plays a pretty big role. Very small gland, that's butterfly shape, but has a massive role in terms of our body. Now, when you're thinking about thyroid conditions and fertility, there's kind of two main categories, right? It's either overactive or, hyperthyroidism, or underactive or hypothyroidism. I tend to see more commonly in practice hypo, so the underactive thyroid condition, and they can also be autoimmune related, or autoimmune driven. So again, the autoimmune version of hypothyroidism, so that's going to be Hashimoto's, and the autoimmune condition for a hyperthyroid is things like Graves' disease. So unfortunately, because of, again, that's the impact of either of these, they can have a really big impact on fertility. So basically, when you're thinking about hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, what impact that might have is it slows down the metabolic rate. So that might lead to things like, weight gain or difficulties losing weight. It may lead to issues with ovulation, because again, there's a slowdown in the reproductive system in general. It might lead to other things like, low mood, constipation as well. In terms of fertility, again, kind of honing into the hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's kind of category here. What we know from the research and what I see in clinical practice as well is, women who have Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, can have, what we call delayed fertility or suboptimal subfertility. So it might take them a long time of trying, and they've, done all the tests, and then they're just not sure what's going on. And what I see, and unfortunately as well in a lot of my clients as well, is they're able to fall pregnant, no issue, but unfortunately their body, they're not sustaining that pregnancy. So they do experience recurrent pregnancy loss. So we're thinking up to 2 to 3 or more miscarriages as well. So it's a very, sensitive discussion as well, because of especially looking at, the recurrent pregnancy loss as well. I'll tell you a bit one of my gripes in this area in particular. So I think when we're looking at thyroid and fertility, what people I think often don't realize is that you can have a lot of these really severe impacts on fertility and pregnancy outcomes with what we call subclinical hypothyroidism. So it doesn't need to be full-blown hypothyroid, but the subclinical, that's probably where I see 99% of the cases. And the issue here is, unfortunately, it does require a lot of advocating for a lot of medical professionals to take it seriously. Because if we're looking at the lab ranges for TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, most lab ranges is going to be between 0.5 to 4, right? What we know from a fertility and pregnancy sense is we actually want to be below 2.5. And anything that's kind of that 2.5 or above, I do begin to become concerned about that risk in terms of fertility and pregnancy health. And unfortunately, a lot of doctors will say, but it's normal because you're within that lab range. So this is one area which, again, definitely requires further guidance and not doing a DIY job. But with my clients, what I do is when I see that they have a lot of these symptoms consistent with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, so whether it's related to things like the fertility history, the miscarriage history, or other symptoms like, again, changes in mood, weight, and bowel, so constipation, I usually do advocate on their behalf. So I will write to their medical providers and discuss their symptom profile, and also link them to the evidence of, especially around fertility, because I think not all professionals are going to be across all of the evidence, and this is it's a fairly niche area. But I found that even with some, endocrinologists, it's unfortunately considered controversial. So I always do the supporting letters, because I think for women, having that treatment, the medical management of the thyroid condition can have such a significant impact in terms of their ability to fall pregnant and stay pregnant. So yeah,
I know we've had these discussions so many times. Just about the importance of advocacy and the difficulty with testing, and trying to meet doctors and specialists halfway in terms of this is your area of expertise, but this person in front of us is struggling with this particular condition or this issue. And it's also trying to put the patient in the center or at the forefront in terms of listening and validating their story and what's going on for them. And so I think that's such a huge part of our work that is sometimes undervalued, I think, in the nutrition space, is, a lot of that background work and, advocacy to have some of these investigations and, be a valuable member of their health team, and just really nurturing that, that healthy team environment. I think, in light of everything we've discussed, I think we've highlighted to our audience just how important it is to have the right health team, and not to DIY your health, and not to maybe just rely on one professional when it comes to health conditions, because, as you mentioned, there's just so much evidence out there on you know, modalities within the nutrition space and other spaces to support women's health. And you've mentioned the Mediterranean diet a number of times actually in our chat. I know you're obsessed with the Mediterranean diet. Is there anything that you'd love to share, whether that's a piece of evidence or a summary of the Mediterranean diet? Just an overall kind of analysis of what people are missing out on if they're not Mediterranean.
Sure, love it. Firstly, I will also just jump back and say I love that reflection about our role in terms of beyond just that one-on-one consult scenario and all the advocacy behind the scenes. So I think that's such a significant part of our work, and I love that you've highlighted that as well. But yeah, the Mediterranean diet. So yes, anyone that's heard me speak or read my post or anything of some sort will have come across the Mediterranean style diet. So again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but for good reason. So what we know, it is one of the most well-researched diets in the world. And look, it doesn't mean it's the only healthy diet. Let's be honest, a lot of traditional diets have very similar, you know, nutrients, the profiles. But if we're looking at the Mediterranean style diet, it just is one of the best researched ones. And in the sense of fertility, it's again going to be one of the best diets for fertility as well. And it doesn't mean it has to be 100% traditional Mediterranean, but it can have elements of it. So in a nutshell, what is it going to, you know, what's it composed of, this diet? We're looking at, you know, mainly the main focus of the diet is very plant focused, right? So plenty of our fruits and vegetables at the base of our diet. I guess your whole grains, so things like, you know, your unprocessed whole grains, having, you know, olive oil every day, which we also know is, you know, one of those beautiful sunnah foods, and, you know, beautiful again, fat profile, which is very beneficial for so many conditions, very anti-inflammatory as well. And then trying to have things like your oily fish in the diet a couple of times per week. So that's one of the other factors which has a really positive impact on overall health, but especially looking at things like inflammation, fertility, brain health, heart health, etc. And then having, I guess this is the biggest contrast to a Western style diet, you know, less of an emphasis on those animal-based foods. So whether it's, you know, your poultry, so your chicken, eggs, dairy, having that a few times in the week rather than, you know, every single day, which is a very much, you know, classic feature in an Australian diet. And then when we're looking at your red meat, you know, having that in small amounts or occasionally, and same with things like your sweets and deep fried foods as well. And yeah, another thing that I think is underestimated in the Mediterranean style diet is it's not just the food, right? It's also how we eat and how we move. So at the very base of the Mediterranean style diet, it's also that we're having, you know, you're eating meals as a family. You're eating together. You're not, you know, sitting at your office and eating at your desk, for example. You're moving every day, and it doesn't necessarily need to mean or look like you're at the gym. It could be, you know, you're walking, you're moving with purpose. So you're doing like gardening, you're doing, you know, chores in the house or things like that. But the lifestyle is active. It's not very, again, contrasted to our diet where we have a very sedentary lifestyle. So we have to go out and go for a walk and go to the gym and things like that. But with the Mediterranean style diet, there is an emphasis on that movement and that social element as well.
And chewing your food is so underestimated. My mum, a lot of how she used to say, chew your food 20 to 30 times before you swallow, like 20 times, mum. And because of the way we eat, our process is like highly processed, so it's easier to bite. You don't have to chew so much. Bite, swallow, bite, swallow, bite, swallow. So we're lacking that chewing.
That's absolutely. And like, as we know, the digestion begins in the mouth. So the more you chew your food well, the enzymes are being released, the amylase, to help your body digest those you know, carbohydrates and other elements. And it's also, like, again, encourage sunnah, which means that you slow down. So naturally, you're not going to be gorging like yourself. You're actually slowing down, and you actually feel the hunger, fullness as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also think in regards to the Mediterranean diet, you mentioned in terms of the lifestyle, and if we look at, you know, countries where the Mediterranean diet is sort of adopted, it's not like they have huge work days and really high stress lives. There's also a real element of
socializing, community.
Community, rest. There's not like a hustle culture, you know. You know, they've got their afternoon siestas. Like there's just a really nice balance of work play
and diversity. Like Western diet we're very sort of conformed to what we eat. Chicken, you know, this, that, red meat, chicken. And the Mediterranean diet is about diversity, you know, diversifying your diet, having more than just an apple, having, you know, apples, pears and different types of fruits and different types of veggies. So we're lacking a lot of diversity.
You're so right. And that leads us into almost your seasonal eating as well. So it's very easy to rely on your safe 3 vegetables you have every night for dinner or every day with your salad or for lunch, for example. Like I said, chicken, easiest protein. So like I'm guilty as charged here. It's just easy, right? So it can be easy to rely on the same foods and just stick to those. But when it comes to more traditional societies, or again, that Mediterranean diet, they eat based on what's in season. So, you know, in summer, you're going to have plenty of fresh salads, plenty of the beautiful fruit, summer fruit. Whereas in winter, you're just going to go with what's in season. You're going to have the stews, using those same few vegetables available that in the winter that's not available in summer. So yeah, absolutely. That's going to have a huge impact on that gut diversity.
You know what I loved about when I traveled, I went to Thailand, Vietnam. I did not know like there was so many varieties of like potatoes.
Really?
Markets know this, like they have like 1 or 2 varieties of potato.
Yeah.
And there's like 10, 12, like you can have, like, I could not believe the variety of one particular vegetable that they had and what we're missing out on here. I was just like, there is so many varieties of potatoes, so many different varieties of carrots, so many different varieties of spinach, like, and you're just like, what? You know, so we're lacking as well the way things are structured in the West. We're lacking so much of that diversity because the supermarkets only stock what we like.
That's 100%.
And so you get that one potato, one variety, and that's all you have from now on. So yeah, there's that whole component missing as well when it comes to Mediterranean diet and eating.
Wow. That would have such a huge impact on the gut microbiome if you're getting so much variety of the same ingredient, right? The same product, produce. Yeah, wow.
Actually amazing. It was amazing to see like how much, like their markets, because they're open, you know, everything's sort of splayed out. And it's not just, you know, one white jack potato. There's 7 then. You're like, oh, I didn't know there was this many varieties of potatoes.
All those different, you know, colors have their different antioxidant and
that's right.
And all the good stuff.
Yeah.
I guess for our last question for you, Mariam, which, you know, super relevant for fertility and particularly in diverse communities, there's often a misunderstanding about the male aspect to fertility and the role that men play when it comes to creating an infant or a child. So I would love your reflections. I would love your reflections on what you've experienced in practice working with people from a lot of Middle Eastern sort of backgrounds, any kind of hurdles you've come across in that space, and what kind of relevance men's health has as opposed to this perception that everything is, you know, on the woman or on the female when it comes to
Love the question. Absolutely love it. And basically, what do we know from the research? We know that, like, if we're thinking about infertility in particular, we know that roughly there's a 50% contribution of both male and female aspect to infertility, and there's some level of it is just female based or just male based, and then some level is combined. So maybe there's some level in the female and some in the male, and it kind of combines to cases of infertility. Now, if we're taking a step back and outside of just purely fertility based, we also know from a preconception health standpoint, which is my passion area essentially, and the health of the future child, again, it does take 2 to tango. With 50% of the baby's DNA is coming from the mum and 50% is coming from the dad. So if we're thinking about, again, the impact of that on the child's health, you know, we need to have a healthy egg and a healthy sperm essentially to create a healthy baby. So we need to be thinking about this well beyond just, you know, fertility related cases. But yeah, if we're thinking about fertility in particular, and I again had a chat just this morning with a client, and you know, I think in my experience, at least with working within this community, in, you know, Middle Eastern based community, what I tend to see, unfortunately, and look, this is actually across the board. It's not just in ethnic communities, but I do think maybe there's a bit more stigma, maybe in certain ethnic communities. But what I tend to see is, you know, with couples that have either, you know, kind of male factor infertility or, you know, mixed male female factor, unfortunately, it takes years for people to actually do those tests and find out that it's not actually all on the woman. So people assume, yep, it must be me because, you know, I'm the one that falls pregnant. I can't fall pregnant. Must be me. And sometimes, again, there is factors, you know, like I mentioned, there is insulin resistance, there is PCOS. So it definitely can contribute to infertility. But no one's actually looked at the husband or the partner and said, let's actually test your sperm and see if there's any issues there. And that can be a game changer, really, because even again, like sometimes it definitely takes 2 to tango. So sometimes we do need to do work on both partners. But if we're not testing the other partner until a year or over a year, then we're just gonna make things. We're gonna delay things essentially. And I've even heard, you know, a lot of my clients or couples that have done IVF, for example, they've frozen the embryos. They've extracted, you know, eggs. They've frozen embryos, but then unfortunately, they can't actually fall pregnant. And again, it's to me, it seems like an awful waste to do all of this without first taking a step back and actually thinking, okay, well, have we tested the sperm quality? Have we actually taken an effort to help support our sperm quality before doing this very invasive procedure and very expensive, process of doing IVF? So yeah, my advice in a nutshell is anyone who's thinking of trying to conceive is definitely working on both partners' health and, general cardiometabolic health. So things like looking at, the lifestyle, but then also specific changes to support, the egg quality and sperm quality. I definitely recommend that at least 3 months before trying to conceive. And for those that are in, unfortunately in the depths of infertility is, just making sure that you're getting all the testing done that you need for both partners and not neglecting, the male partner here, because it can have such a huge detrimental impact. Another kind of side comment, which is also, really important, is for couples that are experiencing, recurrent pregnancy loss. Again, often we think about female-related factors. So I mentioned today things like celiac disease and thyroid conditions, which can impact recurrent pregnancy loss. We actually know that DNA fragmentation in men can cause or contribute to miscarriage in women. So again, in a couple that's experiencing recurrent pregnancy loss, have we tested the partner?
Yeah.
Very, very important. So again, I think it just needs to be, the awareness needs to be there. And again, a stigma, I think, needs to be reduced. I think people, again, it's challenging for a lot of people to consider that maybe it's me. Maybe I need to consider checking out my.
Maybe it's me. Sorry, it's not you. It's me.
Maybe I'm the problem.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do. Yeah. And again, I don't think it's a blame game. I think it's just about taking agency off, everyone take agency of their fertility and doing the best thing for, again,
best outcome. Yeah,
exactly right. Exactly.
And
right.
always
it's not about blame.
Always reflecting on ourselves as part of how we contribute to the situation we're in. Here's a bit of a life lesson there. In terms of, how can we sort of contribute? I love all the reflections. I
was going to actually ask before we move on, if we're going to move on, what are some of the contributing factors to low sperm count?
Yes, great one. So I know Iman is also like a whiz in this space because we've done this together. But yeah, basically we know that over time, sperm quality and count is just declining at a global level and quite drastically. And we think it's related to, a lot of factors, but particularly lifestyle and environmental factors. So we know that with sperm quality, it's very sensitive to things like environmental toxins or endocrine disruptors. So things like, workplace chemicals. So for men that work on job sites, for example, or in trades, we know that chemicals, so things like, BPAs and phytates. So things like, again, in your plastics, which we know that plastic is just in everything these days, whether you're conscious of it or not. So you're picking up receipts when you're doing your shopping, you're using plastic wrapping on your food, you're using skincare products, which also have these compounds. So we know that they can unfortunately.
So myth or not?
Yeah, sure. Tight pants. Yeah, there is a truth there. So for any issues to do with sperm quality.
Skinny jeans, all right?
Yeah. So exactly, boxers versus briefs. Yes, like that, having that breathability is very, very important, and avoiding heat as well. So things like, saunas, spas, or even having your laptops or phones on your lap that we know can be harmful for sperm as well, because again, that temperature regulation is super important.
Mariam, what about the opposite of that in terms of this ice bath craze? Do we have is there anything that you've come across? I know this might be a bit
left
outside of this, scope, but I've always been curious. We know that heat is obviously not a friend of I'm also seeing, I don't know if you've seen, like, if there's anything you've come across, but I'm just curious because we're in this ice bath era.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think that's do you think there might be some benefit in the sperm space, or not sure?
Yeah, look, good question. I haven't seen anything in the literature to comment, but look, I'm just thinking, if we're thinking about it from a logical sense, I'm like, look, maybe if there's an issue with overheating, maybe having a cooling kind of impact, maybe it's beneficial. I don't know. I can't comment. This is purely just speculation. Haven't seen any research around it, but yeah, good question. Good one. I don't know. Maybe it's a watch this space.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the years to come, we're going to see a lot of data come out about a lot of this cold therapy that people are engaging in at the moment. I think it's very much in its infancy now, but I think I'm looking forward to 10 years now when they discover a little bit more about what cold therapy does to us, because I think so far a lot of it's very much anecdotal or Juberman or you know, lots of different coaches saying, yep, you know, cold is like amazing at resetting your nervous system, doing all these things. But I think, yeah, I'm sure we'll find out sooner or later just how great some of these things are. Just to wrap up this sort of conversation around men's health and fertility today, you mentioned environmental toxins and things like that. Are you having to have a lot of conversations around things like shisha and vaping and their impact on sperm health?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up, Inan, because again, we spoke about this just before. Absolutely. So when I see clients, I always, especially when there's a, you know, going through IVF or any issues around male fertility, I'm always asking, okay, especially if I'm, you know, if I'm working with the woman or whether it's a couple, I'm always asking, okay, any smoking, shisha, and vaping. So vaping is one that I think people don't actually think about. They're like, well, I'm not smoking, like it's fine. We definitely know that, unfortunately, all of those aspects, so the shisha, the smoking, the vaping, they can all damage sperm quality. And I think if we're thinking about shisha in particular, there's amount of nicotine in just, you know, one like round of shisha is so significant. It's like, you know, comparing that to one individual cigarette. So I think definitely for anyone who's trying to conceive, if you do smoke or engage in any of these, trying your best to get support to, you know, to quit and get off these. So there's a lot of, you know, smoking cessation clinics available. You can speak to your GP. And there's even like anonymous hotlines, which I've, you know, heard can be very beneficial to help support you to cut back and quit on these. But I think that's a very, very important area to touch on. And yeah, I think I'm just going to highlight the vaping because that's one that I think is popping up and people just actually don't think they're smoking.
Yeah.
They don't think about it.
Harmless, yeah.
Yeah, they think, well, it's fine, like I'm not smoking, but that can also be quite harmful. So definitely one of the big key players in terms of damaging sperm quality, 100%.
And cannabis as well, right?
I was literally
when it comes to
read my mind.
I was literally thinking that as you were talking, that
yes,
even
drugs,
even medicinal.
Yeah, yep.
Medicinal.
And you know, cannabis, anabolic steroids, huge one that can damage sperm quality as well. So yeah, a lot of drugs, whether they're like, you know, legal, illegal, they definitely can impact sperm quality. And I think this kind of also goes back to, if you are thinking of having a baby, having a chat with your doctor, just to have a general health chat before trying to conceive. And they can also look at anything that you're doing that we can kind of, you know, any medication you're taking, whether it's a prescribed one or not, and seeing if there's options or alternatives for that. So I think that's definitely a very, very important point as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much. This was very insightful.
I think that's an amazing discussion, and I love to collab with Mariam. She's such a wealth of knowledge in the women's health and fertility space.
I have so much more questions, so we need to do a part 2 because I've just got so much that I would want you to ask. So
maybe we will do a part 2.
Well,
our listeners, Mariam, can you tell them where they can find you and what kind of services you offer at the moment?
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks so much for having me, ladies, and I really enjoyed this chat as well. And I always love collaborating, yes, with Iman, and now with the team, you know, Mariam and Iman as well. So yes, you can find me on, I guess, socials, my website. On Instagram, you can find me at Thyroid Nutrition, which I'm sure they'll tag me in. I'm on Facebook as well. And then in terms of finding out more about my services, you can check out my website at thyroidnutrition.com.au. And yeah, in terms of my services at the moment, you know, I offer, you know, individual consultations for women and couples experiencing infertility, but it's not just fertility, right? It could be anything, women's health. And yeah, at the moment, you know, there's a variety of services available that you can, you know, it's on my website. And for those that just want to learn more and to see, you know, what might be the best fit for them, they're more than welcome to reach out, and I can happy to have a chat with them. And there's also an option to book in a free discovery call if you just don't know where to start at all. So that can also be a really good starting place. But yeah, I'd also do some group sessions, which at the moment I'm in the middle of running a group program called the Well Conceived Path. And I'm very much enjoying that, but hoping to, you know, run some more of these kind of other, you know, alternative offerings in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. And for anyone who's having any affordability issues, Mariam also has a few workshops which you can purchase, and one of those is a collab between us. So that was a fun one that we did together. But definitely hit up Mariam for any of her services in the fertility space. Thank you so much for your time. We love you.
Thank you, ladies.
And thank you to all of our listeners who have tuned in. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave us your feedback. Tell us what you want to see on the STS podcast, and we will catch you at our next episode.
Thanks, ladies.
All right.